The first gunshot made Abigail Montgomery flinch, clutching her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped onto the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs. The second shot made her duck reflexively, even though it was just another drunken cowboy firing into the air 2 buildings down. She'd have to get used to that if she planned to survive here. Summer 1878 had brought nothing but hardship. What remained of her once fine dress, a faded blue calico now patched in 3 places with mismatched fabric hung limply around her thin frame. The hem was frayed, the lace collar long gone, and her shoes were worn nearly through at the soles. But they were all she had left after the long journey west. Abigail straightened her back and lifted her chin. She may not look like much, but she had her pride. That was one thing no one could take from her, not the bank that had seized her family home back in Boston after her father's death. Not the relatives who had turned their backs, and certainly not the staring townspeople of this frontier settlement. "Would you look at that?" a woman's voice carried from the boardwalk. "Looks like the wind blew in another piece of eastern trash." Abigail pretended not to hear as she made her way toward the general store. She needed work and couldn't afford to make enemies before she'd even found a place to sleep. "I've seen scarecrows dressed better," another voice added, followed by harsh laughter. Her cheeks burned, but she kept walking. The wooden sign of Thornton's general store swung slightly in the hot breeze, just a few more steps. "Miss," a deep voice stopped her in her tracks. "You dropped this." Abigail turned to find a tall man holding the small handkerchief that had been tucked in her sleeve, the only delicate thing she still possessed from her former life. He was a cowboy, no doubt about it. Dust covered his worn leather boots and denim pants. A revolver hung at his side, and his face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes, clear blue and steady, met hers without judgment. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the handkerchief. The women who had been mocking her stood nearby, watching the exchange with smirks on their faces. "Don't mind them," the cowboy said quietly, nodding toward the onlookers. "Some folks can't see past appearances." "I'm quite used to it," Abigail replied, tucking the handkerchief safely away. "Owen Miller," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Foreman at the Double Creek Ranch. Abigail Montgomery." She didn't offer more. Her story wasn't for sharing with strangers, no matter how kind they seemed. The women had moved closer, one of them a heavy-set woman in a fine dress looking Abigail up and down with open disdain. "Owen Miller, you ought to be more careful about the company you keep," she said loudly. "That dress looks like it's been through a stampede and back." Owen didn't look their way. Instead, he kept his eyes on Abigail. "It's not the dress I see, madam," he said, his voice carrying just enough for the gossips to hear. "It's the woman wearing it." The declaration hung in the air, simple but profound. The women fell silent, their mockery diffused by his quiet dignity. "I'm headed into Thornton's," Owen continued, as if nothing had happened. "If you're new to town, Mr. Thornton's fair with his prices, and his wife often knows of work for newcomers." Abigail nodded, grateful for both the information and the unexpected defense. "That's exactly where I was going." "Then allow me," he said, opening the door for her. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store, a welcome respite from the heat and the staring eyes outside. The scent of coffee, leather, and various dry goods filled the air. A counter ran along one side, behind which stood a bespectacled man arranging tins on a shelf. "Afternoon, Mr. Thornton," Owen called. "Owen." "Good to see you," the shopkeeper responded, turning to them with a smile that faltered slightly when he spotted Abigail. "And who might this be?" "Miss Montgomery's new to town," Owen said before she could answer. "Looking for work, I believe." Abigail felt a surge of gratitude at his easy manner, making her introduction seem natural rather than desperate. "Is that so?" Mr. Thornton adjusted his spectacles. "Well, we don't have much in the way of fancy jobs here in Cottonwood Springs, Miss Montgomery." "I'm not looking for fancy," Abigail replied firmly. "Just honest work. I can sew, cook, clean, and I've taught children before." A woman emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was plump and pleasant-looking, with gray streaking her brown hair. "Did I hear someone mention teaching?" she asked. "My wife, Mrs. Thornton," the shopkeeper explained. "Martha, this is Miss Montgomery." "Abigail, please," she said, offering her hand. Mrs. Thornton shook it warmly. "Are you really a teacher, dear?" "Our last school teacher left 2 months ago to get married. The children have been running wild ever since." Hope flickered inside Abigail. "I was a governess for 3 years in Boston. I've taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and even some Latin and French." Mrs. Thornton's eyes widened. "Latin and French? My goodness, the town council would be very interested to hear that." Owen smiled slightly. "Sounds like you might have found your place already, Miss Montgomery." "Perhaps." Abigail allowed herself a small smile, "but I'll need somewhere to stay in the meantime." "The boarding house is full up," Mr. Thornton said with a frown. "Ever since the silver mine reopened, we've had miners taking every spare bed." Mrs. Thornton touched her husband's arm. "What about the old Williams place? It's been sitting empty since they moved to Denver." "It's not much to look at," Mr. Thornton warned. "Been empty for months." "I don't need much," Abigail assured them. After what she'd been through, a roof and 4 walls would be luxury enough. Owen cleared his throat. "I can ride out there with you, make sure everything's secure." "Some of those abandoned places attract unwanted visitors." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Miller, but Owen," he corrected gently. "And it's no trouble, I'm headed that direction anyway." Abigail hesitated. Back east, riding alone with a man she'd just met would be scandalous. But this wasn't Boston, and she was no longer the protected daughter of a merchant. This was the frontier, and she needed allies. "Thank you, Owen. I accept your offer." Mrs. Thornton beamed. "Wonderful. Let me gather some essentials for you just to get you through the night." "Some bread, cheese, coffee. Can't have our potential new school teacher going hungry." As the older woman bustled about collecting items, Abigail tried to protest. "I can't accept charity, Mrs. Thornton. I haven't much money, but I can pay." "Nonsense," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. "This isn't charity, it's an investment in our town's future. You teach our children, and we'll make sure you're taken care of." Owen nodded in agreement. "That's how we do things out here. Everyone helps when they can." Abigail felt a lump in her throat. After months of coldness and rejection, this simple kindness was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed. 20 minutes later, Abigail found herself perched somewhat awkwardly on Owen's horse, riding behind him with a bundle of supplies secured to the saddle. The small Williams house was just outside town, a modest cabin with a porch that sagged slightly and shutters that needed repair. "It's not much," Owen said as he helped her down, "but it's solid enough." Abigail looked at the simple structure. "It's perfect." Owen tied his horse to a post and checked around the property, making sure no animals or drifters had taken up residence. Finding it secure, he helped carry her few belongings inside. The interior was dusty, but sound: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom off to one side, and basic furniture left behind by the previous owners. A table, 2 chairs, a bed frame with no mattress, and a rocking chair by the hearth. "I'll chop some wood for you before I go," Owen said, already rolling up his sleeves. "You've done more than enough," Abigail protested. "Nights get cold, even in summer," he said simply, and went outside before she could argue further. Abigail stood in the center of the small cabin, listening to the rhythmic sound of the axe splitting wood. This morning, she'd arrived on the stagecoach with nowhere to go and nothing but uncertainty ahead. Now, improbably, she had a potential position and a roof over her head. And she had met Owen Miller, a man who looked past her tattered dress and saw her. When he returned with an armload of wood, his face was flushed from exertion. He stacked it neatly by the fireplace, then showed her how to operate the stove. "Town council meets Thursday evenings," he said as he prepared to leave. "I'll mention to them that we have a qualified teacher interested in the position." "I appreciate that," Abigail said, walking with him to the door, "and everything else you've done today." Owen paused at the threshold. "Miss Montgomery, Abigail, this town can be rough at first, but there are good people here. Don't let the gossips drive you away." "I've weathered worse storms than a few cruel words, Mr. Miller," he smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "I believe you have." "I'll check on you tomorrow, if that's all right." Abigail found herself nodding. "I'd like that." As she watched him ride away, the setting sun turning the landscape golden, Abigail felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. True to his word, Owen returned the following day with a mattress strapped to a wagon, along with additional supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and even a few hens in a makeshift coop. "The ranch has plenty," he said when she tried to protest. "These are just extras." With Mrs. Thornton's help, word spread that Abigail was a qualified teacher. Several mothers brought their children to meet her, sizing her up with cautious optimism. Despite her worn clothing, Abigail's educated speech and gentle manner with the children made a favorable impression. On Thursday evening, Owen arrived to escort her to the town council meeting. Abigail had done her best with her appearance, washing her dress in the creek behind the cabin and mending the worst tears. She'd braided her long brown hair and pinned it up neatly. "You look lovely," Owen said simply when she opened the door. Abigail felt herself blush. "Thank you. I wish I had something more presentable to wear." "What you're wearing is fine," he assured her. "It's your qualifications they care about, not your wardrobe." The town hall was crowded when they arrived. 5 men sat at a table at the front, the council members. Abigail recognized Mr. Thornton among them. The room fell quiet as Owen escorted her to a chair near the front, then took a seat beside her. The meeting began with routine matters: road repairs, water rights, complaints about stray cattle. Finally, the mayor, a balding man named Harrison, addressed the topic of the vacant teaching position. "I understand we have a candidate," he said, looking at Abigail. "Miss Montgomery, is it?" Abigail stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Yes, sir, Abigail Montgomery. I was a governess for 3 years in Boston, teaching children aged 6 to 14. Before that, I attended the Boston Ladies' Seminary." An impressed murmur ran through the crowd. The Boston Ladies' Seminary was well known for its rigorous standards. "And what brings you to Cottonwood Springs?" a council member asked. "Seems a long way from Boston." Abigail had prepared for this question. "My father passed away, leaving substantial debts. After settling his affairs, I decided to start fresh somewhere new." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. "Can you handle a classroom full of frontier children?" another councilman asked skeptically. "These aren't refined Eastern youngsters. Some of them have never set foot in a schoolhouse before." "Children are children," Abigail replied confidently. "They all need structure, encouragement, and someone who believes in their potential. I can provide that." Owen spoke up from his seat. "If I might add, gentlemen, Miss Montgomery has already met with several of the children in town. The Peterson boys, who have never shown interest in learning before, asked their mother when school would start after meeting her." This comment caused another ripple of interest. The Peterson boys were known troublemakers. After a brief discussion among themselves, Mayor Harrison addressed Abigail again. "The position pays $30 a month, with the schoolhouse providing living quarters once it's ready. Until then, you'd need to maintain your current arrangements." "That's acceptable," Abigail said, trying to contain her excitement. "School term begins in 2 weeks," the mayor continued. "You'll be expected to teach children from ages 6 to 16 in all subjects appropriate to their levels. The town will provide basic supplies, but you'll need to develop your own curriculum." "I understand, sir." After a unanimous vote, Mayor Harrison declared, "Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, schoolteacher." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Abigail spent her days cleaning and preparing the long-abandoned schoolhouse. A small building at the edge of town with an attached living quarters, just one room with a bed and stove. But it would be hers once the repairs were complete. Owen came by nearly every day, sometimes to help with repairs, other times just to bring fresh milk or eggs from the ranch. They fell into an easy friendship, sharing stories as they worked. Abigail learned that Owen had come west after the Civil War, where he'd served with the Union Army. He'd been at the Double Creek Ranch for 8 years, working his way up from cowhand to foreman. In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a merchant who had dreams bigger than his means. She spoke of her love for teaching and books, though she carefully avoided mentioning the full extent of her family's disgrace. The night before school was to begin, Abigail sat on the porch of her temporary home, watching the sunset. Owen arrived on horseback, dismounting with a wrapped package under his arm. "Thought you might want this for your first day," he said, handing it to her. Abigail unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful dark green dress, simple but well-made, with a matching jacket. "Owen," she breathed, running her fingers over the fabric. "It's beautiful, but I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "A new beginning deserves a new dress. Besides, it wasn't expensive. Mrs. Thornton's sister is a seamstress in Silver City. She owed me a favor." Abigail looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, not just for this, but for everything these past 2 weeks." Owen sat beside her on the porch step, his hat in his hands. "You know, when I first saw you on the street, standing tall despite those women's comments, I thought to myself, there's someone special. I was right." Abigail felt warmth spread through her chest. "You were the only person who looked past my appearance that day." "That's not true," he said gently. "I just said what the decent folks were thinking. This town needed someone like you, Abigail, someone with education and kindness. The children are lucky to have you as their teacher." "And I'm lucky to have found this place," she admitted, "and to have met you." They sat in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Finally, Owen stood. "I should go. Big day tomorrow." "Will you come to the school opening?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it for anything," he promised. The first day of school dawned clear and bright. Abigail dressed carefully in her new green dress, feeling like a different person as she pinned her hair in a neat bun. The schoolhouse gleamed with fresh whitewash, and wildflowers adorned the teacher's desk, a surprise left by someone in the early morning hours. She suspected Owen. 28 children arrived, ages ranging from 6 to 16, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. Parents lingered, watching as Abigail rang the bell to call the class to order. From the back of the room, she spotted Owen standing quietly, his expression one of pride. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Miss Montgomery, and I'm honored to be your teacher." As the children settled into their seats, Abigail caught Owen's eye. He tipped his hat slightly and smiled before slipping out the door. She turned her attention to her new students, her heart full. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks passed quickly as autumn approached. Abigail settled into a routine, teaching during the day and preparing lessons in the evenings. She had moved into the small quarters attached to the schoolhouse, which the town had furnished modestly but comfortably. Most evenings, Owen would stop by after his work at the ranch, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he'd found in town, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, or simply news from beyond the schoolhouse. Their friendship deepened with each visit. Abigail found herself looking forward to the sound of his horse approaching, the quiet conversations on her small porch as twilight descended. She learned to read the subtle expressions on his weathered face, to understand the humor that lurked behind his serious demeanor. One Friday afternoon in late September, as the children were filing out after the final bell, Abigail noticed a commotion in the schoolyard. 3 men on horseback had ridden up, dust-covered and rough-looking. They weren't locals. "Miss Montgomery," called Peter Peterson, one of her older students. Those men are asking about you. Abigail felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. She stepped onto the porch, maintaining a composed expression. May I help you, gentlemen? The leader of the group, a heavy-set man with a dark beard, leaned forward in his saddle. Depends. You Abigail Montgomery? I am, she acknowledged, her hand instinctively grasping the doorframe. What business do you have with me? We represent Hargrove and Sons Banking of Boston, the man said, producing a folded document. We've been tracking you for some time, Miss Montgomery. Your father's debts remain unsettled. Abigail's heart pounded. That's impossible. I liquidated everything before I left. There was nothing more to give. The man's smile was unpleasant. Interest accumulates, Miss Montgomery, and your father's signature appears on documents you may not have been aware of. The remaining children watched wide-eyed, and Abigail suddenly became conscious of her vulnerability. Children, go home now, she said firmly. We'll discuss our history lesson on Monday. As the children reluctantly dispersed, the man continued, We'll need $300 to settle the account. Otherwise, we're authorized to seize any property or income you possess. $300, Abigail gasped. It was nearly a year's salary for her. That's outrageous. I don't have that kind of money. Then I suggest you find it, the man said coldly. We'll be staying at the hotel in town. You have until Monday morning. As they turned to leave, one of the men spotted someone approaching on horseback. Looks like we've got company, Frank. Abigail felt relief wash over her as she recognized Owen riding fast toward the schoolhouse. He pulled his horse to a stop between Abigail and the debt collectors. Everything all right here, Miss Montgomery? He asked, though his eyes never left the three men. These men claim to represent a Boston bank, she explained, her voice steadier than she felt. They say my father still owes money. Owen dismounted slowly, his hand casually resting near his holster. And they've ridden all the way from Boston to collect. That's dedication. The leader, Frank, straightened in his saddle. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. When you ride up to our schoolhouse and harass our teacher, it concerns the whole town, Owen replied evenly. I suggest you take your business to the sheriff's office. Let him verify your credentials before making demands. The men exchanged glances. We're legitimate representatives, Frank insisted, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. Then you won't mind proving it to Sheriff Taylor, Owen said. He's quite thorough about protecting the citizens of Cottonwood Springs. After a tense moment, Frank nodded curtly. Fine. We'll speak with the sheriff, but this doesn't change anything, Miss Montgomery. The debt remains. As they rode off toward town, Abigail's composure finally cracked. Owen, I don't know what to do. I thought this was all behind me. Owen guided her to the porch steps, sitting beside her. Tell me everything, he said gently. So she did. She told him how her father, desperate to maintain their social standing after a series of bad investments, had borrowed heavily against their home and business. How after his sudden death, she discovered they were practically destitute. How she had sold everything of value to pay the creditors, enduring the gossip and pity of Boston society. I thought I'd settled everything, she concluded. I had nothing left to give them, so I came west to start over. But if what they say is true about additional documents. Owen listened quietly, his face grave. When she finished, he took her hand in his the first time he had touched her so intimately. You're not alone in this, Abigail. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The warmth of his hand around her steadied her. Thank you, she whispered. Come on, he said, standing and helping her up. Let's go see the sheriff and find out if these men are who they claim to be. Sheriff Taylor, a former Texas Ranger with a no-nonsense approach to law enforcement, listened to their story with increasing skepticism. Debt collectors don't typically travel 2,000 miles to collect $300, he observed. Something doesn't add up. He promised to verify their credentials and suggested Abigail stay somewhere other than her quarters that night, just as a precaution. She can stay at the ranch, Owen offered immediately. Mrs. Hernandez, our cook, has a spare room in her cabin. No one would think to look for her there. The sheriff nodded approval. Good thinking, Miller. I'll send word once I know more. That night, in the safety of the Double Creek Ranch, Abigail tried to make sense of what was happening. Mrs. Hernandez, a kind-hearted Mexican woman who had been with the ranch for decades, had welcomed her warmly and provided a simple but comfortable room. After dinner, Owen walked with Abigail around the ranch property. The evening was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. What if they're right? Abigail asked quietly. What if I do owe this money? I don't have $300 and I won't for a very long time. Owen was silent for a moment, then said, I have savings. Not quite that much, but close. Abigail stopped walking, turning to face him. Owen, no, I couldn't possibly accept that. It's not accepting if it's a loan, he pointed out. You could pay me back slowly over time. Why would you do that for me? She asked, genuinely puzzled. You've known me barely 2 months. In the fading light, his expression was difficult to read. Because I care about you, Abigail, more than I probably should, given how short a time we've known each other. Her heart quickened at his words. I care about you too, she admitted, but this is too much to ask. You didn't ask, I offered. He took both her hands in his. Let me help you, please. Before she could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Owen instinctively moved in front of Abigail, his hand going to his sidearm. Owen, Miss Montgomery. It was one of the ranch hands, riding fast. Sheriff Taylor sent me, says it's urgent you come to town right away. They arrived at the sheriff's office to find an unexpected scene. The 3 debt collectors were in cells, and Mayor Harrison was there along with Mr. Thornton and several other townspeople. What's happening? Abigail asked, bewildered by the gathering. Sheriff Taylor gestured to a man she didn't recognize, older, well-dressed, with a distinguished bearing. Miss Montgomery, this is Judge Wilson from the Territorial Court. He happened to be passing through on circuit. The judge stepped forward. Miss Montgomery, I've heard quite a tale about your situation. These men, he nodded toward the cells, are not representatives of any bank. They're confidence men who have been working this scheme across several territories. Abigail stared in shock. They're not from the bank at all. No, madam, the sheriff confirmed. Judge Wilson recognized their descriptions from a wanted poster. They find vulnerable people, often women alone with connections to eastern cities. They research enough details to sound convincing, then demand payment for non-existent debts. Relief washed over Abigail, so powerful she had to steady herself against a desk. So my father's debts were settled after all, as far as we can tell, the judge said kindly. Unless you've received official communication stating otherwise. I haven't, she said, still processing this turn of events. Not a single letter. Owen's hand found the small of her back, a subtle gesture of support. What happens to them now? He asked, nodding toward the cells. They'll stand trial for fraud and extortion, the judge explained. Given their record, they're looking at several years in territorial prison. After answering a few more questions, Abigail and Owen stepped outside into the cool night air. The tension of the day had left her exhausted, but relieved. I can't believe I almost fell for their scheme, she said, as they walked toward Owen's waiting horse. You couldn't have known, he assured her. They were convincing enough to fool many others before you. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Abigail spoke again. What you said earlier about caring for me, Owen stopped, turning to face her. In the silver moonlight, his expression was open, vulnerable. I meant it. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. Abigail's heart raced. I feel the same, she admitted softly. It frightens me how quickly you've become important to me. He took a step closer. May I call on you properly, Abigail, not just as a friend helping a newcomer, but as a man courting a woman he admires deeply? Yes, she whispered, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. I'd like that very much. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Owen leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, almost reverent, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek, When they parted, both were smiling. "I should get you back to Mrs. Hernandez," he said regretfully. "It's getting late." As they rode back to the ranch, Abigail leaning against Owen's strong back, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 2 months. From arriving in tattered clothes with nowhere to go, to finding a home, a purpose, and now, perhaps, love. The false debt collector's ruse had an unexpected benefit for Abigail. The story of how they had targeted the town's new schoolteacher spread quickly, generating sympathy and support from the community. Several of the mothers organized a sewing circle to make her additional clothes. Mr. Thornton refused payment for basic supplies at his store for a month. And Mayor Harrison, impressed by how she had handled the situation, proposed a small raise in her salary, which the town council approved unanimously. As autumn deepened, Owen began courting Abigail in earnest. Their routine expanded beyond evening visits to include Sunday drives in a borrowed buggy, picnics by the creek when weather permitted, and attending church together. The town watched their courtship with approving eyes. The respected ranch foreman and their dedicated schoolteacher made a fitting pair. On a crisp November afternoon, Owen arrived at the schoolhouse after classes with an invitation. "The ranch is having a harvest gathering this Saturday," he explained as they walked together. "Music, dancing, food, everyone from town is invited, but—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically nervous. "I'd like you to come as my special guest, meet the ranch owner and his family." Abigail understood the significance. This wasn't just a social event, it was Owen introducing her to his employer, making their courtship official in the eyes of everyone who mattered in the community. "I'd be honored," she said, her smile bright with happiness. The day of the gathering arrived cold but clear. Abigail wore her green dress, now her best dress, with a warm shawl Mrs. Thornton had given her. Owen arrived to escort her in a freshly polished wagon, wearing a clean shirt and his least worn pair of denims. "You look beautiful," he said as he helped her up to the seat. "And you look very handsome," she replied, noting how he had trimmed his beard and slicked back his usually unruly hair. The Double Creek Ranch's main house was impressive by frontier standards, a large 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Lanterns hung from the porch posts, and the sounds of a fiddle and accordion drifted from the barn, where tables had been set up and the floor cleared for dancing. As they arrived, Owen helped Abigail down, then offered his arm. "Ready to meet everyone?" she nodded, suddenly nervous. "As ready as I'll ever be." The ranch owner, Gregory Caldwell, was a robust man in his 60s with a booming voice and firm handshake. His wife, Eleanor, was gracious and warm, immediately putting Abigail at ease. "Owen has told us so much about you," Mrs. Caldwell said, taking Abigail's arm. "We're delighted he's finally found someone special." "He speaks very highly of you both," Abigail replied sincerely. "This ranch seems like a wonderful place." "It's home," Mrs. Caldwell agreed, "and Owen is like family to us. We've been hoping he'd settle down, maybe build a place of his own on the property someday." The implication wasn't lost on Abigail, and she felt her cheeks warm. "He's a remarkable man." "Indeed he is," Mrs. Caldwell said with a knowing smile. "Now, let me introduce you to some of the other ladies while the men discuss business." The evening progressed joyfully. Abigail danced with Owen until her feet ached, laughed at the ranch hand's stories, and felt truly welcomed by the community that had become her home. During a quiet moment, as they caught their breath outside the barn, Owen took her hand. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her away from the celebration toward a small rise overlooking the ranch. In the moonlight, Abigail could see the layout of the property: the main house, the bunkhouse, the corrals and barn, and beyond them, a cleared area near a stand of cottonwood trees. "What am I looking at?" she asked. Owen pointed to the clearing. "That land there, mister. Caldwell offered it to me years ago, said I could build on it whenever I was ready. I've been saving lumber, planning." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I'd like to build a house there, Abigail. A home," her heart quickened. "It looks like a perfect spot." "It would be a modest place at first," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "2 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a porch facing the sunrise, room to expand when needed." Abigail's breath caught at the implication. "When needed?" Owen dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Abigail Montgomery, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here, we learn to recognize what's valuable right away. And you, Abigail, you're the most precious thing I've ever found." He reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. "Will you marry me? Be my wife, build a life with me here." Tears filled Abigail's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand with matching smiles, no announcement was necessary. Mrs. Caldwell took one look at them and let out a joyful cry, rushing over to embrace them both. The news spread quickly, and soon they were surrounded by well-wishers, the women examining Abigail's ring while the men clapped Owen on the back. "When's the wedding?" someone called out. Owen looked at Abigail questioningly. She thought for a moment. "Christmas break would give us time to prepare, and I wouldn't need to miss any school days." "Christmas it is," Owen agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Owen worked on the house whenever he could spare time from his ranch duties, often joined by other ranch hands and townsmen willing to lend a hand. The women of Cottonwood Springs embraced Abigail fully now, helping her prepare for the wedding and her new life as a married woman. Mrs. Thornton and several other ladies organized a quilting bee, creating a wedding quilt with squares contributed by families throughout the community. Mrs. Caldwell insisted on providing fabric for a proper wedding dress, ordering fine cream-colored satin from Denver. "Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day," she told Abigail when she tried to protest the expense. The schoolhouse became a hub of excitement as the children were enlisted to help with decorations. They created paper chains and dried flower arrangements to adorn the church. And Abigail incorporated wedding preparations into her lessons, having students practice their arithmetic by calculating supplies needed, and their writing skills by composing good wishes for the couple. The house progressed rapidly. By early December, the frame was complete and the roof was on. Owen spent every spare moment working on the interior, determined to have it ready for them to move in after the wedding. One evening, as Abigail was helping him install window panes, she asked the question that had been on her mind. "Will I need to give up teaching after we're married?" Owen looked surprised. "Do you want to give it up?" "No," she admitted. "I love teaching. The children have become so dear to me." "Then you shouldn't give it up," he said simply. "The house is close enough to town that you can ride in easily. And eventually, when we have children of our own, they can come with you until they're old enough for school themselves." Abigail's heart swelled with love for this man who understood her so well. Not every husband would be so supportive. Owen set down his tools and pulled her into his arms. "I didn't fall in love with half a person, Abigail. I fell in love with all of you, including the teacher who cares so deeply for her students." He kissed her forehead. "Besides, this town needs you. Those children need you." "And what about when we have our own children?" she asked softly. "Then we'll figure it out together," he promised. "There's no challenge we can't face as a team." The wedding day arrived crisp and clear, with fresh snow coating the ground like a blanket of diamonds. The small church was filled to capacity with nearly every resident of Cottonwood Springs and the surrounding ranches in attendance. Abigail prepared at Mrs. Thornton's house, where the older woman and several others helped her dress in the beautiful cream gown, arranging her hair with small white flowers and a borrowed veil. "You look radiant, my dear," Mrs. Thornton said, her eyes misting as she stepped back to admire Abigail. a far cry from that first day in your tattered dress. Abigail smiled at the memory. I was so ashamed of how I looked that day, I never imagined it would lead to this. Owen saw what the rest of us quickly came to see, Mrs. Thornton said warmly. A woman of strength, grace, and intelligence. The dress never mattered. Mr. Thornton, who had agreed to give Abigail away in the absence of her own father, appeared at the door. It's time, ladies. Our groom is looking mighty nervous at the altar. Abigail took a deep breath and accepted his arm. I'm ready. The church fell silent as she entered, every head turning to watch her progress down the aisle. But Abigail had eyes only for Owen, standing tall and handsome at the altar, his face transformed with love and wonder as he watched her approach. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to face life's challenges together, and to build a home filled with love and learning. With this ring, I thee wed, Owen said, his voice steady as he slipped a second band onto her finger to join her engagement ring. And all that I am, I give to you. With this ring, I thee wed, Abigail echoed, placing a plain gold band on his finger. And all that I am, I give to you. By the authority vested in me, the minister proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Owen's kiss was tender but promised much more, causing a few chuckles and good-natured cheers from the congregation. The celebration afterward was joyous a feast in the town hall with music, dancing, and more food than Abigail had seen in one place since leaving Boston. As she and Owen moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, she was struck by how completely this community had embraced her in just a few short months. As evening approached, they slipped away to begin their married life in their new home. Owen insisted on carrying her across the threshold, setting her down gently in the main room, which he had furnished simply but comfortably with a sofa, a rocking chair, and a small dining table. Welcome home, Mrs. Miller, he said softly. Abigail turned slowly, taking in the space that was now theirs. The walls were freshly whitewashed, the floors polished wood. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over everything. Through an open door, she could see their bedroom, where the community wedding quilt adorned a sturdy bed frame. It's perfect, she whispered, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. Absolutely perfect. Owen wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. We'll fill it with books and children and love, he promised. This is just the beginning. Abigail turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. When I first came to Cottonwood Springs, I had nothing but a tattered dress and fading hope. Now I have everything I could ever want. Everything, he teased gently. Everything that matters, she amended, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. A home, a purpose, a community that cares for me, and a husband who truly saw me from the very first moment. Owen's arms tightened around her. And I'll spend the rest of my life seeing you, Abigail Miller. Not the clothes you wear or the possessions you have, but the remarkable woman you are. As the first stars appeared in the winter sky outside their window, Abigail and Owen began their life together, a life built not on appearances or material wealth, but on the solid foundation of respect, understanding, and enduring love. Spring 1879 brought new beginnings to Cottonwood Springs. The town was growing, with 3 new families settling in the area, bringing more children for Abigail's school. The railroad had announced plans to extend a spur line to the town within the next 2 years, promising further prosperity. For Abigail and Owen, spring meant planting their first garden, adding a small barn for milk cows and chickens, and settling into the rhythm of married life. Abigail continued teaching, riding to and from school on a gentle mare Owen had selected especially for her. On days when weather threatened, he would appear at the schoolhouse with the wagon, insisting on driving her home safely. Their evenings were spent planning, dreaming, and loving. Owen worked steadily on improvements to their home-building bookshelves for Abigail's growing collection, crafting a desk where she could prepare her lessons, adding a covered porch where they could sit on warm evenings and watch the sunset. In late April, as wildflowers carpeted the prairie around their home, Abigail received a letter that left her pale and shaking. Owen found her on the porch when he returned from the ranch, the opened letter in her lap and tears on her cheeks. "Abigail," he asked, immediately concerned. "What's happened? Bad news?" She looked up, her expression complicated shock, grief, and something else he couldn't identify. "It's from my aunt in Boston," she explained, holding out the letter. "My cousin Deanna has died of influenza." Owen sat beside her, taking her hand. "I'm sorry." "Were you close?" "Not particularly," Abigail admitted, "but there's more. Deanna's husband died last year and they had no children. According to my aunt, Deanna left everything to me in her will." Owen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Everything?" "A townhouse in Boston, furnishings, her personal belongings, and—" Abigail hesitated, still processing the information. "A substantial amount in investments. My aunt estimates the total value at over $30,000. Owen's mouth fell open. $30,000. It was an enormous sum, more than he would earn in 20 years as a ranch foreman. Abigail nodded, looking almost frightened by the prospect. "I never expected this. Deanna and I exchanged letters occasionally, but we weren't particularly close. Her husband was quite successful in banking." Owen was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "This changes things for you," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "You could return to Boston, live comfortably among society again." Abigail's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Return to Boston? Why would I do that?" $30,000 buys a lot more there than it does here," he said reasonably, though his heart was pounding at the thought of losing her. "You could have the life you were raised for: fine clothes, servants, social events." Abigail set the letter aside and took both his hands in hers. "Owen Miller, are you suggesting I would leave you for money and position?" Her voice was incredulous. "No, he stopped, uncertain how to express his fears. "I just want you to have everything you deserve." "Everything I deserve is right here," she said firmly, squeezing his hands. "You, our home, my school, this community. Boston holds nothing for me now. It hasn't since the day I left." Relief washed over him, and he pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have doubted. It's such a large sum. It could change our lives." "It will change our lives," she agreed, leaning back to look at him. "But not by taking me away from here. We can use it to build the future we've been planning, expand the house for the family we hope to have, maybe buy some land of our own." Owen nodded slowly, beginning to see the possibilities. "We could build a proper barn, get more cattle." "And set aside money for our children's education," Abigail added, her eyes bright with plans. "Perhaps establish a scholarship fund for students from town who want to continue their studies." He smiled, marveling at her generous spirit. "You're already thinking of how to share this windfall." "Of course," she said simply. "This community embraced me when I had nothing. How could I not want to give back now that I can?" They spent the evening discussing possibilities, writing lists, and making plans. Owen was humbled by Abigail's absolute certainty that her place was with him, regardless of her newfound wealth. When they finally went to bed, he held her close, whispering, "I love you, Abigail Miller, rich or poor, in fine dresses or tattered ones." She snuggled against him, her voice drowsy with contentment. "And I love you, Owen Miller, the man who saw me when no one else did." In June, they traveled to Denver to meet with a banker and attorney recommended by Mr. Caldwell to handle Abigail's inheritance. The trip was Abigail's first real journey since arriving in Cottonwood Springs, and she delighted in the growing city with its fine hotels and shops. With the attorney's assistance, they established a plan for the inheritance. A portion would be invested for their future and any children they might have. Another portion would be used to purchase land adjacent to Double Creek Ranch, 500 acres with good water access and grazing land. Mr. Caldwell has agreed to sell us the lumber from his sawmill at cost, Owen told the attorney. We plan to expand our home and build proper outbuildings. And we'd like to establish a scholarship fund for the students of Cottonwood Springs, Abigail added. $5,000, with the interest to be used annually to help promising students continue their education beyond what our small school can provide. The attorney nodded approvingly. Very sensible plans. Many people who come into sudden wealth make poor decisions. You've clearly thought this through carefully. Before leaving Denver, Abigail insisted on one extravagance, a visit to the city's finest dressmaker. I need practical clothes, she told the seamstress, but well-made ones that will last. Teaching dresses, riding clothes, and perhaps one nice dress for special occasions. The seamstress took her measurements and recommended durable, attractive fabrics. Your husband mentioned you arrived in Cottonwood Springs in quite a tattered dress, she said conversationally as she worked. Abigail smiled at the memory. I did. Everything I owned was in one carpet bag, and my dress had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. And yet here you are now, ordering a new wardrobe as the wife of a prosperous rancher, the seamstress observed. Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it? The most unexpected, Abigail agreed, thinking of how drastically her circumstances had changed in less than a year. But I've learned it's not what you're wearing that matters, it's who you are beneath the clothes. When they returned to Cottonwood Springs, life took on a new rhythm. Construction began on their expanded home, adding 2 more bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a proper study for Abigail. Owen hired workers from town, providing much-needed employment during the summer months when some businesses slowed. The school board was delighted by the news of the scholarship fund, voting unanimously to name it the Abigail Montgomery Miller Educational Fund, despite her protests that her name wasn't necessary. It's entirely necessary, Mayor Harrison insisted. Your generosity will change lives for generations to come. Future students should know who made their opportunities possible. By late summer, their expanded home was complete, and the first section of fencing had been installed on their new land. Owen had purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 fine horses, the beginnings of what he hoped would eventually become a breeding operation. On a warm August evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset, Abigail took Owen's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. I have news, she said softly. Owen's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. Are you certain? She nodded, her face glowing with happiness. Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, likely in early March. Owen whooped with joy, lifting Abigail from her chair and spinning her around before setting her down hastily. I'm sorry, should I not do that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby. Abigail laughed, delighted by his enthusiasm and concern. Doctor Matthews says I'm perfectly healthy and should continue my normal activities as long as I feel well, including being swept off my feet by my excited husband. Owen knelt before her, his hands gently cradling her still flat stomach. Hello in there, he said softly. I'm your pa, and I can't wait to meet you. Abigail ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. What did you hope for? A boy or a girl? Healthy, he said immediately, looking up at her. Beyond that, I don't care. A daughter with your intelligence and spirit would be wonderful. A son with your kind heart would be a blessing. And what if our child inherits your stubbornness? She teased. Then we'll both be in trouble, he admitted with a grin. But we'll manage together, as we always do. As Abigail's pregnancy progressed, she continued teaching, though Owen insisted on driving her to and from school once the weather turned cooler. The students were fascinated by their teacher's changing body, and Abigail incorporated lessons on growth and development into her curriculum, answering questions with age-appropriate honesty. The town embraced the news of the coming baby with enthusiasm. Baby clothes, blankets, and small toys began appearing on Abigail's desk at school, gifts from parents and community members excited to welcome the newest resident of Cottonwood Springs. By Christmas, Abigail's condition was obvious, her rounded belly straining against even her new dresses. Their first anniversary celebration was quiet, but deeply meaningful, a special dinner at home, followed by an exchange of gifts. Owen had crafted a beautiful cradle from cherry wood, spending weeks on the intricate carvings of leaves and animals that decorated the sides. Abigail's gift to him was a leather-bound journal, the first page inscribed with a message. "For Owen Miller, my husband, my hero, my heart. May these pages hold the story of our growing family, beginning with our greatest adventure yet." January brought heavy snows, keeping Abigail home from school for several days when the drifts were too deep for safe travel. She used the time to prepare the nursery, arranging the cradle and the small clothes that had been given to them, reading aloud from her favorite books so the baby could hear her voice. Owen became increasingly protective as her due date approached, checking on her between his ranch duties and insisting she rest frequently. Abigail tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding it came from love. "This baby is lucky to have such a devoted father," she told him one evening as he massaged her swollen feet. "As I am lucky to have such a devoted husband." "I'm the lucky one," he countered, leaning over to kiss her. "Every day, I thank God for bringing you to Cottonwood Springs in that tattered dress. Even though it scandalized half the town," she teased. "Especially because of that," he said, his eyes twinkling. "If you'd arrived in fine clothes with a proper escort, you might never have noticed a dusty cowboy offering you a handkerchief." She touched his face tenderly. "I would have noticed you anywhere, Owen Miller. Some things are simply meant to be." The baby arrived on a clear, cold March morning after a night of labor that left Abigail exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Matthews, assisted by Mrs. Hernandez from the ranch, delivered a healthy baby girl with a strong cry and a shock of dark hair. Owen, who had paced outside the bedroom door all night, nearly collapsed with relief when he was finally allowed to enter. The sight of Abigail holding their daughter, tired but radiant, brought tears to his eyes. "Come meet your daughter," Abigail said softly, holding out the blanket-wrapped bundle. With trembling hands, Owen took the baby, marveling at her tiny, perfect features. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Abigail asked. They had discussed several possibilities, but hadn't made a final decision. Owen studied the small face, her eyes still tightly closed against the new world. "Hope," he said finally. "Hope Elizabeth Miller, because she represents everything we hope for in our future." "Hope," Abigail repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." News of Hope's birth spread quickly through town. Despite Dr. Matthews's insistence that Abigail needed rest, a steady stream of visitors came to offer congratulations and meet the newest resident of Cottonwood Springs, Mrs. Thornton arrived with a basket of food and practical supplies. Mrs. Caldwell brought a silver cup engraved with Hope's name and birth date. The school children, led by the oldest students, delivered a handmade book of drawings and good wishes for Miss Miller's baby. As spring bloomed across the prairie, the Miller family settled into their new routine. Abigail took a brief break from teaching, with a substitute hired to finish the school term. She spent her days caring for Hope, marveling at each tiny milestone the first time she focused her eyes, her first real smile, the way her little fingers curled trustingly around her father's much larger one. Owen rearranged his work schedule to spend more time at home, often taking Hope with him to check on nearby cattle so Abigail could rest. The sight of the tough cowboy with a tiny baby nestled against his chest became a familiar and endearing sight around their property. By summer, their life had expanded to accommodate this new, precious addition. Abigail began planning to return to teaching in the fall, with Mrs. Hernandez agreeing to care for Hope during school hours. Their home, once so new and empty, now felt truly lived in, filled with baby things and the unmistakable atmosphere of a loving family. On a warm evening in July, as Hope slept peacefully in her cradle, Abigail and Owen sat on their porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "I received a letter from my aunt today," Abigail said, breaking their comfortable silence. "She asked again if we might consider visiting Boston, letting the family meet Hope." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "What do you think?" "It's a long journey with a baby, but it might be nice for you to reconnect with family now that circumstances are different." Abigail considered the question, rocking gently in her chair. "Perhaps next summer, when Hope is older and traveling would be easier, but I don't feel any urgency to return." "Boston isn't home anymore." "And where is home?" Owen asked, though he already knew the answer. Abigail smiled, reaching for his hand. "Right here. In this house we built together, in this town that took in a woman in a tattered dress and saw her worth." She looked toward the cradle visible through the open window. "With you and Hope, and whatever other children might join our family in the years to come." Owen lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "From the moment I saw you on that street, standing tall despite everything, I knew you were someone special. I just never imagined how completely you would change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Abigail corrected softly. "And we'll keep changing and growing together, through whatever the future brings." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat in contented silence. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but understanding, respect, and the rare gift of being truly seen for who they were beneath all outward appearances. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another farther away. The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees surrounding their home, and from inside came the soft sounds of their daughter stirring in her sleep. This was their world, now a world they had built together from humble beginnings. A world rich with promise and possibility. A world where what mattered most was not what you wore or what you owned, but who you were and who you loved. And for Abigail and Owen Miller, that was more than enough. It was everything. 5 years later, in the summer of 1884, Abigail stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching as Owen taught 5-year-old Hope to ride her new pony. Their younger son, James, now 3, sat on the porch steps, concentrating intensely on the wooden horse Owen had carved for him. The small ranch had prospered under Owen's careful management. They now had a herd of 50 cattle, 10 horses, and fields of wheat and corn. The expanded house had become one of the more substantial homes in the area, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and Abigail's pride a small library filled with books for both education and pleasure. Cottonwood Springs had grown as well. The railroad spur had been completed the previous year, bringing increased trade and new settlers. The school had expanded to 2 classrooms, with Abigail serving as head teacher and a young woman from Denver teaching the younger children. The scholarship fund had already sent 2 promising students to further education, a young man studying medicine in Chicago and a young woman attending a teacher's college in St. Louis. Both had written letters of gratitude that Abigail treasured. "Mama, look." Hope called, sitting straight and proud on her pony as Owen led it in a circle. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Abigail called back, waving. "You're doing wonderfully." James looked up from his toy. "When can I have a pony, Mama?" "When you're 5, just like your sister," Abigail reminded him, ruffling his dark hair so like Owen's. "That's our agreement." The boy sighed dramatically but returned to his play without protest. Abigail smiled, thinking of the 3rd child growing beneath her heart, still their secret, though she'd tell Owen and the children that evening. Their lives had settled into a comfortable pattern. Owen managed the ranch and continued his work as foreman at Double Creek, though with reduced hours as their own operation grew. Abigail taught during the school year and managed their home and children, with help from a local girl who came several days a week. They had visited Boston 2 years earlier, traveling by train with hope to meet Abigail's remaining family. The visit had been pleasant, but confirmed what Abigail already knew: her life and her heart were in Cottonwood Springs. The elegant townhouse that had been part of her inheritance had been sold, the proceeds invested in their ranch and the scholarship fund. Mrs. Thornton appeared at the gate, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Good afternoon," she called, making her way up the path. "I brought that sourdough starter I promised, and some fresh cookies for these growing children." "You're a saint, Martha," Abigail said warmly, embracing the older woman who had become like a mother to her. "Come sit. Would you like some lemonade?" as Mrs. Thornton settled on the porch. Owen and Hope returned from their riding lesson, the little girl chattering excitedly about her accomplishment. James immediately abandoned his toy to check the basket for cookies, and soon all five were enjoying refreshments in the shade of the porch. "I was just telling Abigail," Mrs. Thornton said to Owen, "the town council is considering naming the new bridge after you two. The Miller Bridge has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Owen looked embarrassed. "That's not necessary. We haven't done anything special." "Haven't done anything special?" Mrs. Thornton scoffed. "The scholarship fund alone would be enough. But you've also helped build the new church, expanded the school, and provided jobs for half a dozen families on your ranch. Not to mention," she added with a wink at Abigail, "giving us these wonderful children to brighten the town." Hope beamed at the compliment, while James, oblivious, reached for another cookie. "We've only given back what the town gave us," Abigail said softly. "A chance to belong, to build something meaningful." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Abigail and Owen sat on their porch swing, a nightly ritual they maintained no matter how busy life became. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a spectacular display over their fields and pastures. "I have news," Abigail said, leaning against Owen's shoulder. "What's that?" he asked, his arm comfortably around her. "We'll need to prepare the cradle again," she said, taking his free hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "Dr. Matthews says late January or early February." Owen's face lit up with joy. "Another baby. Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything?" Abigail laughed at his barrage of questions, the same ones he'd asked with each previous pregnancy. "I'm fine, just a little tired in the afternoons. Dr. Matthews says everything looks perfectly normal." Owen kissed her tenderly. "I can't wait to tell the children. Hope's been asking for a sister." "And if it's another boy," Abigail teased, "then James will have an ally against his bossy big sister," Owen replied with a grin. "Either way, we're blessed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains. Finally, Owen spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about that first day, when you arrived in town in that tattered dress?" Abigail nodded. "Often. It's hard to believe it was only 6 years ago, so much has changed." "Yet some things haven't changed at all," Owen said, kissing the top of her head. "You're still the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. Tattered dress or fine one, it never mattered. It was always you I saw." Abigail turned in his arms, looking up at the face she loved more with each passing year. "And you're still the man who saw me when no one else did, who gave me a home when I had none, who helped me build a life better than any I could have imagined." As darkness settled over their land, they held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the love that continued to grow with each passing season. From humble beginnings, a woman in a tattered dress and a cowboy with a kind heart, they had created something beautiful and enduring. A family, a home, a legacy of generosity and love that would outlast them both. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered.